Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Ayşe Süberker. Once a minor player in global energy markets, Israel is set to take on a bigger role as a gas supplier. And it comes at a crucial time. EU countries are seeking new sources as they move away from Russia over its attack on Ukraine. And Israel won't be alone in getting energy supplies to Europe. It will be working with Egypt. Last week, the EU, Israel and Egypt signed a tripartite gas export deal that will provide the bloc with a new source of energy. European Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen hailed the agreement as a special moment.
And today we are already taking a very important step, as we have in the morning signed a memorandum of understanding of natural gas delivery from Israel to Egypt, here the liquefying of the gas and then the transport to the European Union. This is a big step forward in the energy supply to Europe, but also for Egypt to become a regional energy hub.
But analysts warn that Israel will fall short of replacing Russia. Last year, Moscow supplied nearly 40% of the EU's needs, or about 155 billion cubic meters of natural gas. During the same period, Israel only produced about 12 billion cubic meters. So will Europe's new fragmented strategy of having multiple, smaller sources of energy help end its dependence on Russia? And to discuss this further, joining me now from Paris is Sohbet Karbus, who is an oil and gas analyst, and from London, Tom Marzek-Manser. He is the head of gas analytics at ICIS, a global market data and research group. A warm welcome to you both, and thanks for joining me on Straight Talk. So, Tom, how significant is this memorandum of understanding between the European Union, Egypt, and Israel, and what will this agreement deliver in the short term?
Well, actually, in the short term, I don't think it will deliver very much at all. And that's because Egypt is already working with Israel to export Israeli pipe gas into Egypt, and then Egypt to send it on to the European market already. We've seen volumes of LNG being exported out of Egypt rise quite a lot in recent months, and a lot of that going to Europe, largely because Israel is already sending some of its pipe gas to Egypt.
So is it enough to satisfy Europe's energy needs?
Oh, absolutely not. No. I mean, the situation with Russia's gas supply to Europe is getting worse by the day. In fact, today is probably one of the lowest flows of Russian gas into Europe in many, many decades. So Europe needs all the gas, all the LNG that it can possibly get its hands on, and any extra molecule that it can get from Egypt directly or from Israel via Egypt will help in some shape or form.
So, Sohbet, what's your take on that? How significant is this deal, and is it viable and feasible way to transport energy to Europe? And are there any geopolitical or financial risks ahead?
Well, this framework agreement, in fact, is not short term. It's because it doesn't cover only gas deliveries to Europe. It covers methane emissions, hydrogen, a lot of things. And when we look at in this way, so it has more long-term nature. So already Israeli gas goes to Europe through liquefaction facilities in Egypt. So we cannot expect too much, but still nearly half of the Egyptian liquefaction capacities are unutilized. So maybe not this year, but in the coming years, these capacity, which is more or less 17 billion cubic meters, could be fully utilized with the additional gas from Israel. But altogether, we are talking about 17 billion cubic meters compared to 155 billion cubic meters of Russian gas. So this is negligible. So in other words, this will be still more than, for example, what Azerbaijan sells to Europe. But in that sense, it is significant because it opens a new supply source and a new route in terms, if we assume that all will go, because Egyptian LNG is mostly sold in spot market. So it will depend on the price too.
So, Tom, how will this deal hurt Russia's future gas exports to Europe in the middle term, let's say?
Well, I don't think it's going to hurt. I mean, Russia's supplies to Europe are pulling back, as I mentioned already, pulling back aggressively all the time. The European Union really would like to entirely cut its dependence on Russian gas, and at the moment we're seeing flows drop to just 100 million cubic meters per day, when 3 years ago there were 500 million cubic meters per day. So Europe kind of needs the gas now, but doesn't want the gas, and so if it can have sources of supply from elsewhere, then this will really help the situation from the European perspective.
So, Sopet, if the conflict in Ukraine had not happened, would the European Union still reach out to Israel and Egypt?
Yes, I think so, because Europe has already mentioned before several times to diversify gas supply sources and routes. In that sense, Mediterranean region in general was in the radar anyway, but the amounts would not be maybe as much. But not only Egypt, also we are talking about Algeria too, to increase the supplies from Algeria, because we also have the similar situation. Half of Algerian 33 billion cubic meters of liquefaction capacity is unutilized, but it depends on whether Algeria can provide or fill all these capacity. It will depend on demand. So Mediterranean region has always been important, but the EU has moved to or preferred to focus on US LNG, which is kind of a policy mistake, maybe.
So, Tom, what do you make of Europe's efforts to cut reliance on Russian energy? What kind of a strategy are they following to cut this reliance, actually?
Well, as has already been mentioned, sourcing LNG from elsewhere, such as the USA, is key to that strategy. Reducing demand is being talked about aggressively in the last few days. We've heard Germany, the Netherlands, and Austria all say in the last 2 or 3 days that they're extending the lives of coal-fired power stations or allowing coal-fired power stations to run for longer, and therefore reduce gas consumption in the electricity generation sector. But of course, the price is also the market price is the big driver of all these things in terms of reducing demand and also incentivizing supply.
Yes.
As has already been mentioned, Egypt sells its LNG on a spot basis. So if Europe is the more expensive market, it will come to Europe. If Asia becomes the more expensive market again in the winter, then actually some of this volume will go to Asia and not to Europe at all.
So the European Union seems to be following a fragmented strategy in which it'll buy smaller amounts of energy from a number of different countries. So is this strategy viable over the long term? And as just Tom mentioned, wouldn't it raise costs and hurt the environment?
Well, we see a policy U-turn in the EU, because from fully electrification, hydrogen economy, and climate change policies, now it seems that energy security is put in front of climate change. But on the other hand, we have a comedy of error. We have returning to coal, and we always have seen that there were, from time to time, also return to fuel oil. So the only thing is, as the colleague mentioned, you have to reduce demand. But unfortunately, we have another comedy of error there. Instead of reducing demand, how we reduce demand? You leave the prices go up. But what Europe does is to subsidies and put price caps. This is not the way to reduce demand. Let the market work. So there are a lot of conflicting things in the EU, but time will show whether they are right or not. But it seems that they will be more wrong than right.
So, Tom, how do you think Russia is viewing these latest efforts to diversify energy sources away from Moscow, from some European and Middle Eastern countries with which it has deep-seated relations as well as security deals? Is it unsettled?
I don't think Russia's unsettled. I think it probably expected this response from the European Union. If it was reducing spot sales of its gas and now is cutting long-term contract supplies of its gas to some of its largest customers it has in the world, it would have expected that the European Union would not just stand by and accept this, that it would seek to shore up supplies, both at a political level, but of course, as I've already mentioned, the price of the TTF, the benchmark price in Europe, which ICIS tracks closely, is the thing that really draws the traders and the buyers and sellers to the market to bring in that extra gas. And Gazprom will have known this in advance.
So, Sopet, since a significant increase in gas exports from Israel via Egypt would require major infrastructure investments, could this agreement expand so as to cover Lebanon as well as the divided Cyprus? And if so, where would that leave Turkey and the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus in this picture?
Well, first of all, Chevron will decide how the gas will go to Europe, because they will, by the final investment decision for the second phase of developing Leviathan field, which will increase or double the production there. So we are talking about 10 billion cubic meters of at least additional supply. But the facilities in Egypt is not sufficient. So even then, there needs to be an additional pipeline to bring the gas from Leviathan to liquefaction facilities in Egypt. So there is an offshore pipeline, or there could be a pipeline, another pipeline like EastMed pipeline, or a pipeline to Turkey, or what could be, in my view, a better thing to do is that Chevron is already working on to construct or to use a floating LNG facility.
Yes,
Flexible, and then, of course, it could Chevron and its partners could develop both Leviathan field and the Aphrodite field in southern Cyprus together. So, but there will be definitely a big money to be invested on infrastructure.
So, Tom, now that the Mideast project has been called off, the EU is investing more than 650 million euros for the construction of an undersea electricity cable that will link the power grids of Israel, Greek Cypriot sector, and Greece. How viable is this, especially without Turkey's inclusion?
I think these multi-billion-dollar projects, or that go underneath the sea, are very, very difficult to get across the line. The European Union, particularly when we're talking about gas, is really concerned about lock-in. Building an LNG terminal allows that gas to go globally. So if Europe's general green agenda returns in maybe 5, 10, 15 years' time, when it's more secure on its gas, it doesn't need that volume. So building the pipeline is not ideal in that respect. And then similarly, if you're talking about electricity interconnections, there really are long-term plans that need to be taken into consideration, which do make getting these projects over the line very difficult, particularly if you're working in regions, multiple regions, really, multi-geographies.
All right, gentlemen, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk.